Right before we jump into this video, I want to ask you, how do you input, organize, and protect your gear? Well, if you don't know, check out my app called My Gear Vault. It's free. Go download it right now for iOS and Android. Jared Polin, phronosphoto.com, and this video is about giving you tips for taking better time-lapse videos, whether you're doing it for a vlog or you're doing it for a video to help pass time, or say you're a painter and you want to show your painting start to finish that so happens to be 12 hours long. You're not going to run a camera for 12 hours and then speed that up. You could do a time-lapse video, let it shoot, and then compress the file into a final video file. Now that's what we do because we've been using the Canon 6D Mark II, which allows you to shoot a 4K time-lapse, and then it takes the file, all of the images that it takes, and exports it as a finished video file, whereas the Nikon D850 will allow you to shoot 8K time-lapse, but it will shoot individual images, click, click, click. Then you have to go ahead and do the rest of the processing after the fact to then turn it into time-lapse. Now, a camera like the Canon 6D Mark II has a built-in intervalometer. Now, what an intervalometer allows you to do is set the duration of the image and how many you want to take, and then it triggers the camera every single time. Now, a camera like the Sony a7R III does not have a built-in intervalometer, but you can purchase an external one that will do the same controlling. You just have to spend more money in order to get that. But I do like using the 6D Mark II because not only does it have the intervalometer built in, it shoots 4K, and then it bakes in the file at the very end, so it's ready to go without me having to do too much work. Speaking of baked-in files, you want to make sure that you set your picture styles. Now, when I shoot RAW, it doesn't matter what my picture styles are set to because I'm going to tweak that all after the fact. But when you bake in a file, it's kind of like shooting JPEG because that's exactly what it's doing. It's taking, say, 1,000 JPEGs in a row and then turning that into the video files. It's what I do when I shoot vlogs, so you want to make sure that you set your picture controls, you want your tone set, your white balance, you want all of that stuff locked in before you start taking that first image. So I mentioned 4K time-lapse in the 6D Mark II. Well, the Nikon D850 does an 8K time-lapse. Now, the importance about having more than 1080 is that if you're going to deliver your video file as a 1080 file in the end, you can now push in, or you could pan. You can add some more movement into the final video because it adds some awesome movement, which is really important to push your story forward. So on the flip side, the Canon 5D Mark IV only does 1080 time-lapse. It's almost useless at that point. You really need something like 4K. But of course, if your camera only does a 1080 time-lapse, that's perfectly fine. It's still going to give you fantastic results. Here's one of the best tips I can give you for setting up your time-lapses for video, is if you're going to be shooting something that has a lot of motion or people walking by, say they're going into an event and they're waiting, they're standing around, they're milling around, and then all of a sudden the doors open and everybody floods in and you want to show that, you want to try using a slower shutter speed when you're doing your time-lapse. So for example, I think a second is a good starting point. So anywhere from a half a second to 2 seconds, depending on how much motion blur you want to show, is where I would start. Now the point of doing that is if you just wanted to show people moving and you just had a fast shutter speed, it would almost be like you were shooting video and you just sped it up. So if you want to convey that there's motion going on, you really want to start with a shutter speed around a second and then figure out the rest of your settings from there. So keep in mind, if you're in a bright place and you're shooting at 1 second exposures, you may end up shooting at, say, f/22 at 100 ISO or the base ISO. Now, if you want to add some more depth of field, say you're shooting an object and you want all the people going around it, but you want a shallow, narrow depth of field, you may want to introduce a neutral density filter, which will cut down on the amount of light being let in, which means you can shoot at a narrower depth of field. Here's another tip. You're going to need a way to stabilize your camera. Either that's going to be a tripod, or you could just rest it on something flat and it can just sit there as long as you're not moving it. Or I like to use a gorilla pod because that allows me to attach the camera to interesting things like a railing where I'm trying to get the sunset out west when I'm in Santa Monica or something. I can attach it right there, or attach it to just about anything. So you need some kind of stability because if you're shooting at a second shutter speed 1,000 times in a row, you're not not going to be able to handhold that because of the movement. Here's another tip. You're going to want to lock in your settings, not just exposure, but also your focus. Because if you want to focus on a specific area, you lock in your focus, because if autofocus was on and a subject moved and it started tracking them, it may mess up your time lapse. You're also going to want to lock in your exposure. So when I was in Washington, D.C. shooting the Capitol building, the sun was going down. It bathed the building in beautiful sunlight. It was golden hour and it looked tremendous. But I had to lock my exposure in because I knew as the sun was going to go down, the camera, if I left it not locked in, would try to expose and make everything look great, where you wouldn't see that gradation of the sun going down and then the darkness hitting and the light starting to come up. So because I locked my exposure in, it made for a fantastic time lapse. Here's another simple but good tip. Make sure your camera batteries are fully charged before you start shooting your time lapse. The last thing you want to have happen is your battery dies and all of a sudden you lose your time lapse. So certain cameras, if they offer you an extended battery grip that you could put in a larger battery, like the Nikon D850 allows you to take a Nikon D5 battery, you could shoot for hours upon hours upon hours in time lapses, so make sure your batteries are charged before you start shooting. Or if you're going to be shooting for an extended long period of time, try to have some kind of power adapter that allows you to be locked in and not have to worry about running out of power. So once you get the basic tips down and you're feeling frisky and you want to go further with your time lapses, you can start to add some motion. You could add sliders, you could add cable cams, you can add a whole bunch of different things to try and get some different results that add that motion. Anytime you see sliders in time-lapse photos, they start to look really cool and make a big impression. So that's about it for my tips for shooting time-lapse videos. What tips do you guys have? If you have them, leave them down below in the comments, and that is where I'll leave it. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya. Do you want to check out some other cool videos that I've created? Well, go ahead and click over here or over here. There's 2 videos to click on. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Go ahead and hit that like thingy and share this and comment. That's it. Go ahead. Click on something. I dare you.